This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israeli forces continue their unrelenting assault on the Gaza Strip throughout the weekend, killing scores of Palestinians, even as Israeli and Hamas officials resume talks in Qatar aimed at a ceasefire. Al Jazeera reports Israel carried out over 100 bombings in just 3 days. Earlier today, more than 40 Palestinians were injured when an Israeli drone bombed a school housing displaced people in central Gaza's Nuseirat refugee camp. Before that, an Israeli attack on a residential building in the Barej refugee camp killed 4, and 7 Palestinians, including 2 farmers, were killed in 3 separate attacks in Rafah. In Gaza City's Sheikh Radwan neighborhood, an Israeli airstrike late Saturday killed 11 people, most of them members of the Zud family. Relatives of the dead worked by hand to sift through the ruins of their home, hoping to find loved ones trapped in the rubble.
3 young men, the son's wife, and 3 children are still under the rubble. We retrieved this cousin of mine. Another cousin has been martyred and is now in the hospital. Approximately 11 people have been martyred here.
The Palestinian Ministry of Health reports another baby in Gaza has died of hypothermia, the 8th such death. In Qatar, representatives Hamas say they've approved a list of 34 Israeli hostages to be released as part of the first phase of a potential ceasefire deal. The list includes all women, children, seniors, and sick people still being held in Gaza. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu downplayed talk of progress toward a ceasefire as spin and dismissed Hamas's offer as propaganda and psychological terror, unquote. In the occupied West Bank, 3 people were killed, 8 others wounded, when 2 attackers opened fire on Israeli cars and at a bus near the West Bank settlement of Kedumim earlier today. Israeli soldiers said they were pursuing 2 suspected Palestinian shooters. President Biden's reportedly notified Congress of a new $8 billion arms sale to Israel. The deal includes artillery shells, small-diameter bombs and warheads, and munitions for fighter jets and helicopter gunships. In approving the sale, Biden once again rejected calls to suspend U.S. support for Israel's military over war crimes committed in Gaza. The Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, condemned the sale, writing, quote, "Only racists who do not view people of color as equally human and sociopaths who delight in funding mass slaughter could send Netanyahu even more bombs while his government openly kidnaps doctors, destroys hospitals, and exterminates the last survivors in northern Gaza," CAIR said. Israel's embassy in Brazil helped a 21-year-old Israeli army reservist flee the country after a Brazilian federal court ordered police to open an investigation into possible war crimes he committed in Gaza. That's according to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which reports Yuval Vagdani was under investigation for his role in planting explosives and destroying entire neighborhoods in Gaza. The Hind Rajab Foundation, a Belgium-based group advocating for Palestinian rights, had compiled 500 pages of evidence against Vagdani before Israeli diplomatic staff reportedly helped smuggle him out of Brazil. The Israeli military has warned its soldiers they could face arrest while traveling abroad over crimes committed in Gaza. Ukraine's military has launched a surprise cross-border offensive in Russia's Kursk region, where there are reports of fierce fighting. Before Ukraine's renewed offensive, Russia had retaken much of the territory Ukraine seized when it first invaded Kursk last August. On Sunday, 1 person was killed, another wounded, when Russian forces shelled the city of Nikopol in southeastern Ukraine. Further south, at least 8 people were wounded when Russian troops shelled the city of Kherson. Meanwhile, Russia has vowed to retaliate after it said it shot down 8 U.S.-supplied ATACMS missiles fired by Ukraine at the Russian region of Belgorod. Russian President Vladimir Putin previously threatened to respond to such attacks using Russia's new nuclear-capable hypersonic ballistic missile. On Capitol Hill, House Speaker Mike Johnson squeaked through a win, retaining his gavel on Friday, after Donald Trump called 2 Republican lawmakers to ask them to change their votes to support Johnson. In an acceptance speech, House Speaker Johnson said defending the nation's borders should be Congress's #1 priority.
In coordination with President Trump, this Congress will give our border and immigration enforcement agents the resources that they need to do their job. We will secure the border, we will deport dangerous, criminal, illegal aliens, and finally finish building the border wall.
Earlier in the proceedings, after the first roll call vote, the Democratic delegate from the U.S. Virgin Islands, Stacey Plaskett, addressed the chamber. She asked why delegates representing 4 million U.S. citizens from the Virgin Islands, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia were not called to vote before her microphone was cut.
This body and this nation has a territories and a colonies problem. What was supposed to be temporary has now effectively become permanent. We must do something about this problem so that these 4 million...
With the House Speaker voted in, a joint session of Congress is meeting today is scheduled to count electoral votes and certify Donald Trump's win. Outgoing Vice President Kamala Harris, who repeatedly called her election rival Trump unfit for office, will oversee the process as the president of the Senate. This comes exactly 4 years after a horde of Trump's supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to delay the certification or stop it of Joe Biden's win and keep Trump in power. Trump has vowed to pardon those convicted for taking part in the Capitol insurrection. One of those convicts is 32-year-old Anthony Vo, who recently fled to Canada instead of reporting for his 9-month prison term. Vo, who's since been giving interviews and snowboarding at the Whistler Resort, is hoping to receive a Trump pardon or asylum from the Canadian government. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is set to become the first felon to serve as U.S. president after New York Judge Juan Merchan upheld his felony conviction in his 2016 election subversion hush money case. Trump is scheduled to be sentenced this Friday, January 10th, though he's not expected to receive any prison time. In more Trump news, the president-elect hosted far-right Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida Saturday. Trump described Meloni, who also has close ties to Elon Musk, as a fantastic woman who's, quote, really taken Europe by storm, unquote. Meloni's meeting with President Biden later this week as he travels to Rome and the Vatican. The Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist Ann Talnis has quit the Washington Post after her editors rejected a cartoon depicting billionaires genuflecting to President-elect Trump. Talnis says it was the first time since she began her work at the newspaper in 2008 that she had a cartoon killed because of who or what she chose to aim her pen at. A draft of the cartoon depicts big tech owners kneeling at Trump's feet, offering up sacks of cash. Among them is Amazon founder and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos. Just 2 months ago, the Post featured Ann Talnis in a video celebrating her work.
I mean, just look at all the autocrats that hate editorial cartoonists. I mean, and not in this country, hopefully, but in, a lot of my colleagues overseas are thrown in jail for doing cartoons about powerful people. A lot of people don't realize that, we're journalists. We're opinion journalists, but we are journalists. And that is our job as editorial cartoonists, to bring up sometimes uncomfortable truths.
On Friday, Ann Talnis published an online post titled, "Why I'm Quitting the Washington Post," in which she writes, quote, "I will not stop holding truth to power through my cartooning because, as they say, democracy dies in darkness." That's the slogan of the Washington Post. This comes after Jeff Bezos prevented the Washington Post from endorsing Kamala Harris for president, and as Amazon's Prime Video service announced it's acquired exclusive licensing rights to a new behind-the-scenes documentary about incoming First Lady Melania Trump. Amazon also plans to donate $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund and said it would stream the event on Prime Video as a separate in-kind donation worth another $1 million. Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with Boston University historian Quinn Slobodian, author of Crack Up Capitalism. North Korea fired a suspected intermediate-range ballistic missile into the sea earlier today as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Seoul, where he called for the U.S., South Korea, and Japan to band together against Pyongyang's warming relationship with Moscow. Blinken's visit comes amidst a deepening political crisis in South Korea as authorities have failed to execute an arrest warrant for impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol, who remains barricaded behind heavy security. Tense protests pitting Yoon's supporters and his critics have erupted near the presidential residence. Yoon defenders have been holding signs reading "Stop the Steal," a reference to Trump's 2020 election subversion campaign. This is a protester in Seoul.
Now our country, the Republic of Korea, is fighting against Chinese agents and those who are subservient to socialism. But we will recover soon. Our president, Yoon Suk-yeol, is at the forefront of this fight. Just as U.S. President Trump has stood against a fraudulent election, we will reveal the truth about the fraudulent elections in our country as well.
And two of Canada's biggest newspapers are reporting Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is preparing to resign as Liberal Party leader as soon as today. Trudeau has faced growing calls to step down amidst high inflation and after his finance minister quit amidst a public spat over how to respond to Trump's vow to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.